In 1916, the osprey was made extinct as a breeding bird. It was persecuted by man, its eggs were stolen, and it was shot. For almost 40 years, the osprey did not return to Scotland until in 1954 a pair nested by Loch Garten, and every year since then eggs were laid in our nest. Until the year 2002, when for the first time in almost 50 years we didn't have any eggs. And in fact exactly the same thing happened in 2003. In 2003 a new male osprey arrived. He was 5 years old, and as far as we're aware he'd never bred before. He was named Henry. The problem was Henry was without a female osprey until June of that year, when a white, leg-ringed female arrived. We couldn't understand what she was doing on our nest, because she got her own nest 40 kilometres away. But then we checked, and we found that EJ had been kicked off a nest by another female osprey after she'd laid eggs. When she arrived, it was far too late for her to breed with Henry, but he fed her throughout the summer. We knew that in 2004 Henry would be back to the nest at Loch Garten. What we didn't know was whether the female would come back to our nest, or whether she'd attempt to get back onto her old nest. In 2004, it was an extremely important year for us at Loch Garten. Not only was it the centenary of the RSPB in Scotland, but it was also the 50th anniversary of ospreys returning to breed in Scotland. We hoped and we prayed that we wouldn't have a third eggless year. We were delighted to see on the 25th of March that the female EJ had come back to our nest and not tried to get back on her old nest. She actually came with a fairly fresh rainbow trout. Not got that one from Tesco's. That one's courtesy of the fish farm at Rothimercus. Now, bearing in mind she'd just flown 3,000 miles, she looked in superbly fit condition. And we hoped that within a matter of a couple of days, Henry would be back to join her. In fact, it was 3 days later that a male arrives. In fact, he doesn't land on the nest, he lands on the female's back, and she allows him to mate. That's not Henry. Now, according to the books, that shouldn't happen. If she's never met that male osprey before, she shouldn't allow him to mate. He should do an elaborate courtship display, present fish to her. But we then saw that this guy had got a leg ring. It was an orange leg ring with the letters VS, so we did some detective work and found that this was her old mate from a previous nest, and that's why she'd let him mate. Everything fell into place. Now, he'd been here 3 days, and he mates with her again, and suddenly he flies off, a bit sharpishly, and the female looks round her a bit sheepishly, as well she might, 'cause Henry's back. We get a really good close-up view of his talons here. Those talons are razor-sharp killing machines for fish. And his beak, that's designed for ripping the flesh of fish. The bonny birds, Henry. What we wanted to see was them getting back down to the things they should be doing before the female lays her eggs. And the first thing is delivery of fish. If the male's fit and well, then the female will never go fishing for herself while the male osprey's here. Here we can see Henry just arrived with a fish. I think he's a wee bit reluctant to give that one away, but we've got to remember that these birds don't spend the winter together. They could be, well, 400-500 miles apart in Africa. And all over the winter, Henry's been used to catching his own fish and protecting it from things like gulls and crows that may want to steal the fish from him. Now he gets back to Scotland and suddenly he's got to catch a fish and then give it away. And it takes these males perhaps a week to get back into the swing of things. But he does it. The next thing we want to see is nest building. And This is Henry, and that's not a stick, that's half a tree. That must have been 7 foot in length. What he intended to do with that, goodness only knows. What the male's doing now is he's scraping out a nest cup, and it's into the nest cup that the female will lay her eggs, and she normally lays her eggs about 12 days after both birds get back together. The final thing we want to see them doing is mating. And they'll mate between 10 and 15 times a day over something like a 21-day period. So, from what you've seen up to now, everything looks as though it's been going swimmingly well. Well, we had major problems in 2004. The major problems were these. It was at dawn, every morning, that our female was under attack. And she was under attack from another female osprey. We could see that this female had got no leg rings. We couldn't identify her, but our best guess that she was a 3 or 4 year old bird back in Scotland for the first time. What she was trying to do was intimidate our female and get her off the nest. This nest is a valuable commodity in osprey terms. And as the days went by, the attacks became more and more aggressive. And our fear was that our female should have been spending all day, every day on the nest, conserving her energy, but she wasn't. She was having to spend up to 8 hours a day flying. And the energy from the fish was going towards flying. And we were concerned for the 3rd year in succession, we wouldn't get any eggs laid on our nest. And the attacks were relentless. They went on and on and on, day after day after day. This attack is something really quite unique. The intruder actually comes at our female with a stick. Our female was lucky not to get hit, but the intruder gets her on the second pass. These attacks went on for 13 days in a row, and then suddenly, Saturday the 17th of April, they stopped. We didn't get an attack. It was a lovely morning. Henry disappeared about 9 o'clock. He came back at 9:45 with a fish. And suddenly we witnessed something we'd never seen on our nest before. The intruder follows Henry back in with a fish, and now we've got 2 female ospreys on our nest. These talons are razor sharp. These birds are risking not only serious physical injury, but perhaps even death. Henry's still about with that fish, bless him. This was 10 o'clock. All the birds disappeared. It was an hour before we saw another osprey on our nest. Our female's back, but she's agitated because here comes the intruder again. And the intruder lands in the centre of the nest. And our female almost rips a wing off. The intruder was really lucky not to have broken a wing in that attack. Again, all the birds disappeared. It was another hour before we see another osprey. At noon, both our pair are on the nest. EJ on the right, Henry on the left, but the intruder's in the background again. Here she comes. Henry's still got that fish, bless him. Henry's out of there. You two sort this out. Our female goes up in the air, the intruder lands on the nest, and this is amazing. How the intruder wasn't killed in that attack, goodness only knows. 3 hours later, we were stunned, because our pair are back on the nest. Our female puts her head in the nest, and she takes out a broken egg. That egg had been smashed in the fight between the 2 females. To see the first egg that had been laid in 3 years come out of that nest smashed, you can imagine how we felt. It was to be another 3 days before we got a telephone call from our volunteers to say, you better get up to the visitor centre now because you'll want to watch what we've just recorded. And this is what they recorded. What we now know you're watching is an osprey actually laying an egg. But we couldn't be sure at the time. We needed some more evidence. The first piece of evidence was this. A couple of hours later, Henry comes back with a fish. Now, if there's an egg in that nest, the female will never eat the fish in the nest. She won't want bits of fish dropping into the nest, starting to rot, starting to smell. That will then attract the attention of crows, which might try and predate the osprey egg. So if there's an egg in that nest, the female will always take it away with her to eat. There were about 55 people in our visitor centre at the time, and they were all saying, "Go on, get off that nest." And eventually, to a huge round of applause, she did. But we still couldn't be sure. We needed more evidence, and the next piece of evidence is down to Henry. If there's an egg in that nest, it's now Henry's job to incubate that egg while the female's away eating. Now, Henry's never bred before, and he makes his way to the centre of the nest, and he looks down. And we now know he's looking down for the very first time in his life at an unbroken osprey egg. Now, nobody's given him an instruction manual. Page 22, wife's away, my turn to incubate the egg. The question was, would instinct take over? Would he know that he'd got to incubate that egg? And bless him, that's exactly what he did. But we needed more evidence, one more piece of evidence, and this was it. This was 8:30 that evening. We got, for the first time in 3 years, the silhouette of a female osprey's head against the moonlit sky. We knew we'd got an egg. We then had to wait 36 days and 36 nights to see this change in behaviour. Henry's brought a fish back to the nest, but the female hasn't flown away with it. That's because she can see what we can just about see. One tiny head bobbing around in the bottom of the nest. And 2 days later, she comes back to an exercise flight, and we suddenly see not one tiny head, but two. We've got twins. And then 3 days later, we recorded the most amazing piece of film. Henry's just brought a fish back to the nest. It's always the female osprey's job to feed that fish to the chicks. Now we can see 3 heads, but Henry's decided he's modern man, and he is going to feed these chicks. And this is only the second time in history that a male osprey has ever been recorded feeding chicks. And 7 days later, he's at it again. This is amazing, amazing footage. This pair of ospreys really worked well as a team here last year. In June, we had day after day after day of rain, and now Mom is covering the 2 youngest chicks, keeping them dry. Henry's just brought a fish back. What's Henry doing whilst Mom keeps the youngest dry? He is feeding the oldest chick. If that's not teamwork, I don't know what is. We jump forward another week now. Something's upset Mom. She is not happy at all, and she's off that nest. We've got to admit, we know what's upset her. It's us. We've gone out there, and we're now going to ring those chicks. We have to wait until the youngest chick is 4 weeks old. By that time, its legs are fully developed, but it can't fly. The nest itself is 45 feet in the air, so we use a 60-foot ladder. We draw straws, and the assistant warden lost. We choose a nice calm day, for obvious reasons, and the assistant warden climbs the ladder. Now, Mom's calling ahead, and because she's calling overhead, she's giving alarm calls to the chicks, and they say to the chicks, you need to take defensive action. And the defensive action the chicks take is to remain absolutely still. They're remarkably well camouflaged, and because they're still, it makes it relatively easy for the assistant warden to take them out of the nest and down to the ground, one by one. The oldest chick was first down, and the youngest chick was second. And there's only 5 days age difference between the two birds, but you'll see the difference in size, and the oldest chick was almost twice the weight of the youngest. We then put rings on the chick's legs. We put a metal ring on the one leg and a coloured ring on the other leg. Last year we used yellow, and our 3 chicks were 27, 28 and 29. And the chicks are perfectly well behaved. They think they are amazingly well camouflaged against the heather. You can't see me. We also measure the chicks. We measure the legs, we measure the wings, and we measure the tail. And by doing this, we can see whether they're male or female. And last year, in 2004, our 2 oldest chicks were both females, and the youngest was a little male. And there they are, being weighed, never an ounce of trouble. Apart from the oldest chick. That was a bit frisky. I think we heard ouch at that stage. And that was a 2 plaster job. Oof, that hurt. There they are, the chicks from the most famous bird's nest in the world line up for the photo call, and the oldest decides to get its own back by leaving us with a little memento of the occasion. And of course the middle one couldn't be left out because that did similar. But the one on the end had great taste, never had an ounce of problem. So we say goodbye to the chicks, and then the assistant warden takes them back up to the nest, one by one. And this now is the last and youngest chick to go back onto the nest, and the assistant warden, he's seen the problems we've had on the ground with the oldest chick, and I don't think he's looking forward very much to coming face to face with the oldest chick 45 foot up a ladder. I don't know what he's worried about. It's only a chick. You can't get the stuff nowadays. I think, at the end of the day, he was pretty glad it was all over and done with for another year. He certainly got down the ladder a wee bit faster than he went up. So we dash back in the centre, and then within 2 minutes the adult birds are back on the nest. But last year, it wasn't an adult bird. It was actually a wee kestrel. It became a kind of guardian angel to the chicks for the rest of the season. We jump forward another week now, and here's the oldest chick. He's now 6 weeks old. He can't fly yet, but it's exercising those wing muscles, building up those wing muscles, because within 6 weeks it's going to be on its way to West Africa. And as well as getting 1 metre, 2 metres above the nest, it used to jump from one side of the nest to the other. The problem was, when you can't fly, it's sometimes a wee bit difficult to get back onto that nest. But she did it. Then, when they're about 7.5 weeks old, they're ready to take the first flight. And this was the maiden voyage of the oldest chick. And away she went, and she flew miles. Well, 10 feet. Landed underneath the nest, and there was a friend, the kestrel, just keeping an eye on her. Now, if you remember, the middle chick was 2 days younger than the big sister, and the middle chick took her first flight 3 days after she did, which is about what we'd expect. This is the young male, and he's 5 days younger than his oldest sister, so we expected him to take his first flight about a week after her. There she is, just come into shot. Here we are, 18 days after the oldest has taken its first flight, and the young male still hasn't gone. So Big Sis decides, well, perhaps all you need is a helping hand, or maybe even a helping foot. But he's gonna go in his own sweet time. So Big Sis, I think, decides to give it up as a bad job. She leaves him to his own devices, and he has a quick scratch. He checks that his wings are still attached. Yes, they are. This is what you were supposed to do. You're a bird. And to a round of applause they could hear on the car park, he took his first flight. And there he is. And it was 4 days after that that the female left. The job's done for the year. She's incubated her eggs, she's brooded them, she's fed the youngsters, she's protected them, she's made sure they can all fly. See you next year, guys. I'm off. And away she went. And it was 3 weeks after that that the oldest chick left. And 4 days after that that the middle chick left. So these birds don't go as a family party. They go one by one. And Henry, bless him, stayed until he was sure that the youngest chick had gone. It wasn't until the end of the year that we appreciated how good Henry was, because at 6 osprey nests in the area, all chicks had died from starvation. We knew at the end of 2004 that we had got one fantastic male osprey on our hands.